Welcome back to Media Voices, everybody. This is the latest in our series of deep dive episodes looking at the key media moments that have shaped the industry over the past 12 months. This time we're looking at emerging tech, so that's Web3, the metaverse, people can't see I'm doing that in air quotes, how that has intersected with publishers over the past 12 months. And we're bringing in a media expert for every single episode. And this week we're joined by Simon Owens. Simon, thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So why don't you give everyone a brief intro to what you do?
Yeah, so I'm as shorthand, I usually say I'm a media industry journalist. I run a Substack newsletter that's published 1 to 2 times a week that dives deep on topics on everything from the down from the creator economy all the way up to traditional media companies. So I analyze trends and talk about things that are working and aren't working within the media industry in terms of how publishers and creators are finding audiences and generating revenues with those audiences. And then I also host a podcast called The Business of Content, and that features all kind of like what you guys do, just long form interviews with media operators where we just really kind of walk through their business and figure out why they're successful and how they work.
Well, Esther, why don't you tell everybody where they can find more insight like this if they want a sort of snapshot of the entire year across all these verticals and sectors?
Yeah, so the topics we're discussing this season, they're all going to be featured in our annual Media Moments 2022 report. That is actually going to be released next week, November the 30th. So you can pre-register to receive the report as soon as it goes live over at voices.media/mm22.
This season and the Media Moments 2022 report would not be possible without the support of our wonderful sponsors, Pool. Pool is the membership and subscription suite used by leading publishers around the world. You can find out more about them, as well as lots of useful case studies and benchmarking tools at pool.tech now. That's POOL.tech, and we'll link to them from our show notes at voices.media.
We are going to be talking about emerging tech and what that means for publishers. And I have got the absolute joy of being joined on this call by 3 total cynics about Web3 and the metaverse. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to roll this dice, and whoever the number I have assigned to comes up, they will be my partner for this sparring match about Web3. So let's see. That is Peter. Peter, you are now optimistic about Web3 for the next hour.
Love it.
So to begin with, Esther, when we're talking about emerging tech, what have been some of those, I suppose, the key things that we've spoken about over the past year?
There hasn't been.
Well,
okay, I know. I think if you compare this year to last year, it's been a year of 2 huge it's been 24 months of 2 huge contrasts. Last year, there was an awful lot of excitement. Facebook decided that it was going all in on the metaverse, and subsequently there's a huge marketing hype about it. There was a lot of experimentation in the NFT space. You saw a lot of publishers going into things like NFTs. There were the Rabbitars from Playboy. Forbes went and launched sort of all their NFT characters. This year, it's just all come crashing down. And I think we've always sort of said there's going to be it's going to be a sort of period where everybody gets really excited and then reality kicks. I didn't expect it to happen literally within 12 months. And for me, when we've been looking back and discussing some of the really exciting things happening for publishers, it's all been the old media formats that have been the exciting things. It's been newsletters, it's been podcasts, it's been things like Substack and blogs, and the way that people are sort of reformatting content on the internet. There's been nothing exciting we've discussed in terms of VR, AR, metaverse, anything like that, or even cryptocurrency. It's been a really disappointing year.
Well, I think disaster capitalists are pretty excited.
I slightly disagree, but Simon, what have been some of the key moments? Esther there was talking about this sort of crypto winter.
Yeah, I mean, it really kind of started with the rise of inflation, and then the Federal Reserve stepping in and raising interest rates in order to, basically stop inflation. And the theory always was, I think, that crypto was some kind of inflation hedge, but that immediately turned out to be the case. And all of a sudden, you started seeing a cratering in the pricing for many of these cryptocurrencies, which then kind of pulled the entire I don't know what word to use, but basically all these crypto companies were shown to be just houses of cards that were stacked on, fake products. And all of a sudden we saw several things come crashing down. Some of the highlights were, the Terra stable coin completely collapsing. We've seen several Web3 and crypto exchanges collapse, most recently FTX, and it's all just become crashing down, and it's dragged just about everything within the crypto world down with it, including things like NFTs, DAOs, and other kind of Web3 platforms.
Okay, well, let's just get straight into it then, because obviously we have seen, as you mentioned, that FTX collapse this week has been heralded as the end of crypto. I don't think that's necessarily the case, but to what extent? Oh, Peter, shaking your head. You're feeling optimistic about it?
No, I don't. I'm not optimistic. I'm already.
Well, Peter, the dice say you have to be optimistic.
Sorry. Yeah, I'm very optimistic. The fact that I'm $2,000 in the hole on crypto is neither here nor there. I mean, if I okay, I'll take your poison chalice.
Sure.
I think for whatever reason, this has been a horrendous year for big tech. Saw a tweet this morning: 120,000 layoffs. Compare that to the .com collapse at 2000, and that was 107,000 layoffs, and we're not even at the end of quarter four. So that's not good. It's got to have an impact on that kind of bleeding edge investment. But here's the silver lining. I think it might bring a sense of reality. And there'll be a focus on stuff, hopefully, that actually works rather than the kind of Ponzi scheme that was particularly driving crypto, but also NFTs and whatever. So I think that, if reality bites, that's a good thing, because it's not going to go away. None of this is going to go away, but it's got to get focused on real uses rather than stupid fanboys with monkey NFTs.
Yeah, it's interesting to see the number of platforms and publishers who are sort of too far in now to a project to pull it. So obviously Twitter was kind of pushing its own NFTs. Reddit's got its own NFT avatars now as well. And you sort of think, well, they can't pull that now. They're too deep in the hole.
Elon Musk can do anything.
Oh, God. We spoke about him too much last week.
Except run a company.
So, Esther, what happened with CNN?
So this is one of the few publisher examples I could find that was an update on a project that they'd launched, because loads of publishers launched projects last year, and they don't tend to publish when it hasn't gone very well. But actually, the CNN one did hit headlines. So they did this Vault by CNN marketplace last year that was selling collectible sort of moments tied to major news events. They dropped that last month, and it got quite a lot of people really, really angry. There were these users that had spent thousands of dollars on exclusive access, features coming in the future. It had really sort of bought into it. And actually, when I was reading through it, a lot of the comments coming out were like, well, because you were a publisher, because you were a trusted organization, we bought into this rather than some of the sort of dodgy NFT Ponzi stuff run by the fanboys, because we trusted you as a brand. And it's actually, it's a bit of a kick in the teeth then that the publisher has just gone like, yeah, no, actually we're completely pulling this. Although the article did note that it lasted 16 times longer than CNN Plus.
It's a low bar. So Simon, what then is the sort of I suppose the opportunity for publishers now, publishers, broadcasters, basically media companies who are looking to maybe get into crypto while it is this lull?
No, not at all. This is a sign that they should, be exiting completely, and that they're really. It really showed that the emperor has no clothes. That all these things that were pitched about Web3, that it will allow you to own your audience, that it'll decentralize content distribution, that it will, allow you to have more direct interaction with your audience, that really kind of there really was nothing there. And there were most of the things that it claimed to do, Web 2 was already doing it better and easier. And I still have not seen any good use cases of, Web 3 that's practical and scalable for publishers.
I think one of the things that really came out over the last few years is that there is this general panic around new technologies. Everybody was talking about Web3, saying this is the future. There is this general perception that publishers were very, very late to a lot of the kind of classic web stuff, the Web2 stuff. And I think there was this sort of paranoia that would they be the really late ones again? So I don't know. I don't know if there's really any advice for publishers about emerging tech, like how do you strike that balance between not being the absolute last one on it and also not going straight for it when there's no, people couldn't even explain what Web3 is.
To some extent, but I think that there was a first mover advantage when it came to NFTs for publishers. Because remember, it was sort of last year we were talking about the astronomical sums that people were paying for, like the Alice in Wonderland cover. So there was genuinely a sort of one-off opportunity there for them to generate some revenue. I think that the smart money, such as there is in crypto, is talking about using NFTs as tokens to allow some functionality down the line. So I was talking to Virtue, their sort of Vice's agency. They were doing work on behalf of Coke. And they were saying, basically, if this is going to take off in a big way, it actually has to confer some benefit, whether that be some sort of like member-only access to a site using this token.
Because the Dirt did that, didn't they?
Yeah, Dirt. And Dirt's like one of the cool ones. One of the only cool Web3 projects I've ever come across. But yeah, like what you're talking about is called utility within the Web3 world. But what you're saying, like gating off access, that's already done by Web2 much easier than having to learn how to buy Ethereum and then, unlock it using a crypto wallet and all that. Like it's just Web2 with extra steps. Like you can gate off content. Now you could have member only communities that are based on subscriptions or memberships. All of this is much more efficient and easier technology to use than your standard Web3 platform.
Is that something you think will change? And is that something you think will change in the future?
No, I mean they claim that they're always like whenever you press them on this, and I was at a creator economy summit or conference earlier this year, and I was talking to some of these people over meals and breaks, and I was kind of pressing them on the lack of functionality. And like the thing is, and I'm not a technologist or coder, so I can't really speak super technically on this, but the blockchain it's really cool in how it functions in creating scarcity of digital assets, which nobody has been able to do, but it's also a really inefficient type of technology. And whenever I would press them on some lack of functionality, they would always be like, oh, well, they're going to build this. They're going to build this. And that's always been the perpetual thing. But like some of the technologists who actually watch this space, they've kind of examined these claims that things are being built to allow X, Y, and Z, and they can find no evidence that there are actually developers out there building these functionalities. So I just don't think it's going to get that much easier.
That's true of any technology, right? Any brand new technology takes time to be useful. And I think the problem was people weren't interested in the technology. They were interested in doubling their money. It's a classic Ponzi scheme.
Yeah.
So I think this is a time frame issue. And, where I disagree with Simon is on the time frame. I think it will get better, but I think it could take 10 years. And then that's when you will get that functionality. And it'll just be like people, my mom pays, sends my daughter her birthday money using digital banking. That's mind-bending for an 8-year-old to be doing that.
I think you can say gives her NFTs.
That would have been cool. And I think that's just, it's exactly what Simon's saying, that if you've got to figure out how to buy Bitcoin or Ethereum or whatever other token it is, to be able to do something that you can already do using your credit card, is never going to happen. So it's an interface issue and a utility issue. And I think it will be fixed, but it'll take a long time.
FTX was in the middle of building all that cross functionality, and we know how well FTX is doing right now.
But I suppose will the incentive be there to simplify, to innovate, and to do that if it already exists in, I suppose, the normal world? And I think the other thing that became really, really apparent this year is that the systems that have come up around regulation and banking, and the reason we have so much regulation in these systems in sort of, I'm going to call it real world money, have become very, very apparent in the fact that there is pretty much none in crypto. I wonder if we'll end up seeing this sort of retreat to sort of quote real money and regulated banking systems.
Well, without going off on my anti-capitalist rants, that happened in banking 10 years ago, 12 years ago. It's not, that's about money. It's about people. It's about what people do. The collapse of FTX is basically just a bank run. It's the exact same thing that happened to Northern Rock in the UK. People took all their fucking money out, and that was it.
At least with banks, we have the FDIC. At least in the US,
absolutely. Absolutely. I don't know. Long term, I think there will be benefits. I think tokens for subscriptions. Maybe I don't know why you would do that, but if you can get into wallets that will. I hate to bring up micropayments, Esther.
I was just about to say, Well,
if you can get into wallets,
conversations around that, yeah.
But yeah, if you can get into wallets that support micropayments, that whole conversation starts to be different because there's a lower cost of transaction. That becomes interesting.
Well,
if the utility and the interface can be sorted out.
Well, who's solving this problem is Elon Musk with his X app.
Oh, fuck. Yeah, Chris, I'm trying my hardest here. I'm trying really hard
I appreciate it.
This is the second podcast I've been on in the last week where the hosts were like, we need to go as far as we can into this episode without talking about Elon Musk.
This is the second episode that we've done in a week where we did that, and we made it 28 minutes and 15 seconds. Okay, so we should move on because obviously we can talk about some of the specific examples of that in our media moments at the end of the episode. But for now, we should talk about the metaverse. I know that, Simon, I don't know if you've listened to the podcast, these two hate the idea. The metaverse is pretty much just gaming. It's these like little virtual instances. There's no interoperability. There is none of the kind of the promise that ultimately people are sort of predicating all their metaverse experiments on. But there have been some good and fun experiments in there. But at the moment, that's really all it is. That's an experiment. We saw ITV early in the year launch The Voice within Roblox. Since then, Roblox told me that it wants to make self-serve marketing experiences like that a bigger part of its business. So publishers can transfer some of their experimental budget just across two platforms like that. And in March, Vogue held its Vogue Business and Yahoo Metaverse experience on the dedicated mini metaverse platform Journey. And I spoke to Kirsty McGregor, who's the senior European editor at Vogue Business, who's just launched their own Web3 vertical. And she says that what's possible on metaverse platforms already outstrips audience expectations, particularly when it comes to luxury. But the problem is that that's not necessarily accessible to everybody.
Well, what was it? Elle did that thing.
We've seen a few.
What it was called, and that got pretty rave reviews. But it was it was the experiential aspect of it. Going along and seeing this and being part of it. And that's kind of different from real, honest to God, metaverse, plugging yourself in kind of thing. I think that's the point, isn't it? It's just novelty. That's as good as I've got.
No, I think that one of the things that's, again, become quite apparent this year is that actually a lot of the metaverse platforms are really struggling to get users. Even some of the most popular ones have got 500,000 users a month, which it's not a lot if you're looking to spend sort of 6-7 figures on building an experience for it. And that's just sort of bizarre stuff like the cost of space in these metaverse applications. It's like there's just so much money going into it, but every time I read it, there's something about sort of Adidas were building a virtual store experience in one of them, and I was like, well, what's the drive for somebody to go and like shop for a virtual shoe? I just don't understand.
See, but I think that again is potentially, this is because I play games a lot. There is the drive for that. People love cosmetics within games, and that's effectively what this is. So for instance, I did a video tour of Nikeland, which has done really, really well. And part of that was you can buy, Nike outfits for use across Roblox because that's the platform that was built on. Now, was I destroyed by a bunch of 10-year-olds in some of the mini games? Yes, absolutely. There's nothing I can do about that. But is there something there? I think there is, because it is built on gaming, and gaming has always had some of those cosmetics at the heart of it.
This comes back to what we were saying last week, is that at the moment, the kind of business and living and life side is being put before the gaming experiences in a lot of the metaverse case studies and things that are coming up. And it's like, it needs to be a place you go for entertainment before the rest of it follows, not a place that you go to have a virtual meeting. Like that side of it isn't there yet. And I still maintain people want people and real life experiences. I think the last couple of years has demonstrated that more strongly than ever.
I think that's where Meta's totally missold what they're trying to do, because they kind of went on that meet people rather than play games.
Yeah, they went all in on enterprise stuff.
You know, when you're in a meeting and no one's sat beside you's got any legs, that's kind of weird.
Yeah.
I think that, so like they renamed it Meta, and then their main metaverse, which is called Horizons or something like that.
Yeah.
It actually lost users. So you have a $100 billion plus media in terms of revenue company that renames itself, saying we're going to go all in on this new technology, and the core product within that technology actually lost users. Now, what does that say about the metaverse as a whole and its future? Like, I think sometime in the future, depending on how far in the future we're talking about, maybe 20, 30 years, we will live in these virtual realities that extend far beyond just what you're seeing from Roblox and Fortnite right now. But in terms of Facebook specifically, I think in terms of renaming itself, it really extended put the cart before the horse in terms of creating a product that people actually want to use.
I mean, at the rate Facebook are burning through money, they won't be here in 20 years.
Well, it's interesting. I wonder how much of that rename was predicated on Zuckerberg just being a tech geek, and how much of it was them going, holy shit, Apple is destroying our advertising revenue. We need to do a very public transition to something that is less dependent on something that Apple can just pull away from us.
No, do you know what this is, though? Zuckerberg's watched Ready Player One, and he just wants to build that. That's all he wants to build.
Yeah, I also think it's like Facebook has gotten so large, it's not cool anymore. It's losing users, but it can't acquire other social media companies because it would run into antitrust regulation. So he's kind of in a box where he can't create products that people want to use, and he can't acquire products that people are already using. And so he has to move into some kind of new piece of emerging tech that could possibly be worth $1 trillion 10 years from now. And his big bet was that piece of emerging tech was the metaverse.
Yeah, specifically kind of the VR aspect of it, which will be part of it, but it's not, how a lot of people are going to interact with that. Just before we move on, I will say, I genuinely hope that we are wrong about this, because some of the VR, AR experiences that I've seen, we could talk about that as its separate thing. That's not necessarily the metaverse. From publishers have been amazing. Do you remember 16 by 9 by The Guardian? I've seen a couple of really, really good
But Chris, that was nearly 10 years ago.
I know.
This is what I mean.
This is what I mean. Why hasn't it moved on? But
and FT's Hidden Cities was like, 8 years ago?
Yeah, that was fun, but that was like Google Cardboard. But this is what I mean. Some of the best citizen journalism I've seen.
I forgot all about Google Cardboard.
Yeah. Some of the best citizen journalism I've seen over the past years has been delivered through 360 video, which is easily accessible through the Oculus. I would love there to be more of that.
Can I raise the tone of this? Because there is actually a piece of technology this year that has come out that I am actually quite excited about, and I think is more beneficial for publishers, and that's AI image generation.
Oh yeah, we should have been talking about that this whole time. That's amazing.
Right.
That's great. I mean, that is just like, you talk about exciting times in tech. Like I am just still blown away. I guess it'll get old after a while. It'll get less amusing, but seeing some of this stuff, and like I'm currently a subscriber to Getty Images, but I'm thinking of letting that subscription lapse and then subscribing to Midjourney or something, because every publisher needs some kind of image to go along with their articles, because it creates thumbnails, it ranks better in SEO and stuff like that. But we're not necessarily photographers or designers or anything like that. So we, as a shortcut, we subscribe to these stock image creators, which everybody has access to the same images. The idea to be able to create your own like really good image to go along with it, or article or whatever, that could be abstract, in different ways, like that genuinely is exciting.
I mean, it terrifies me, the thought of what it's going to do to illustrators, because like whoever runs Axios's illustration department is going to be, out of a job. Like every publisher, from like the small sort of solo operations right through to some of the huge ones, can use this as a way to create sort of some really quite niche, weird, and wonderful stuff. Like, we could create all sorts of things to go along with articles that are normally quite difficult to illustrate just from sort of stock imagery.
Yeah,
and Dall-E, I think, is the most popular one. That's the most well-known example. some of the stuff Dall-E's generated has been absolutely incredible. I think one of them actually won like an art award.
Yeah,
that was controversial,
and it was an incredible piece of art. Like it deserved to win.
There's a couple of things that we should probably talk about here. One is I'm part of the Stable Diffusion subreddit, which is made up of people who are using Stable Diffusion to generate AI art, and it is mostly, I would say 50% of the posts are them taking the piss out of traditional illustrators for getting up in arms about this. Yeah, like Simon said, like Esther alluded to there, I'm sick to death of using Pixabay, Unsplash to find Scrabble tiles arranged to say like optimism.
Yeah.
Or like,
yeah.
Going to video recently as well, which is absolutely fascinating. Some of it is just
that scares
unreal.
me. That scares me a bit more.
Well, is it the potential for disinformation around the videos that scares you?
Yeah, I think so. There's some of the. I think I've probably just seen more frightening examples of video. The Dall-E and a lot of the more well-known artwork generators have got quite a lot of restrictions. So you can't say you can't use sort of real faces and say do me an image of Biden winning the next election, because it sort of distorts the faces, because it's almost got the safeguards against trying to be used for that sort of thing. The video ones I've seen have not had quite such the safeguards. So I've seen some quite frightening.
Yeah, Sam, I don't think Midjourney has those restrictions, does it? Because I've seen some of exactly what Esther's talking about there, kind of that real people in different scenarios.
Yeah, I haven't looked into the specifics, so I don't know.
Yeah, but there's all sorts of things around that, especially when it comes to publishers around like commercial and copyright cases. I think so. Dall-E, I know, the OpenAI owns the generations, but it does actually allow publishers to sell the rights to the images at the moment. But I mean, that just feels like a whole new area that we actually probably need a couple of court cases to go through in order to set any kind of precedent.
Yeah. I think at least in the US, it's still open question whether AI art can be copywritten. There was a recent case where it indicated that it could, but there were previous cases where it wasn't able to be. There weren't any IP rights associated with it, so it's definitely not. There's not a lot of precedent yet.
My one issue with these is that you can tell what's been generated by AI. You can tell a mile away. Yeah, you can. Sure. You absolutely can. I think eventually that's going to get really old unless it changes.
Why do you say that?
Because it's just every publication will look the same.
Oh, what?
No,
every publication is using AI to generate their images.
Yeah, but like you could tell the AI to do it in different styles. Like you can even name the name of like a famous artist and say in the style of Picasso or like stuff like that. Like there's just so much. There is a lot of diversity and variety in terms of the images.
If you look closely at the edges, you can tell.
And also, right, come on, we're all using the same stock image. Yeah. We're all using the same stock images.
I absolutely agree with that. I just think there's got to be some movement in it, or it will get old.
The one thing that I think is funny is at the moment, a lot of them aren't very good at hands at all. So like you'll see some really, really fucked up hands, and that's how you know that it's like,
Hands are hard though. Hands are really hard. I draw hands.
Yeah. That's
like that scene from iRobot where Will Smith's giving the robot shit for not being able to do a masterpiece. And the robot says, well, have you ever painted a masterpiece?
Well, before we get into Will Smith's filmography, we should probably move on to some of our key media moments, and then we can come back for a special Will Smith episode, because Bad Boys for Life is actually pretty good. And so my key media moment, we spoke about NFTs earlier, but I was really interested. I was interested to find out that Second Life still has its own dedicated in-universe newspaper. That is fascinating to me, the Second Life Inquirer. But the Web3 moment that stuck out to me was when the Associated Press tried to sell a photo of a migrant boat. Do you remember this? As an NFT. This was back in February. And the backlash was predictably and correctly extremely negative. Coverage was saying, they were profiting from suffering. But it speaks to this idea that you have to be a lot more careful when you're introducing new paid-for products to your audience around this kind of stuff. Because that was obviously... I think the speculation was that had not passed enough eyes on the way to the marketplace.
Even things like we were talking about CNN earlier, that was where you could buy NFTs off particular stories. And I mean, that's exactly the same thing. I think it's just not quite as emotive, in your face as that example. Recent. And South China Morning Post has sort of made millions and millions of pounds selling NFTs of some of its archive stuff. And I don't think they're distinguishing between this is a story of human suffering and this isn't. If you're a news publisher in this space, there are very few stories you can sell that aren't in some way about human suffering. That's sort of the news business.
Yeah, if you'd sold like an NFT of the Hackney Gazette front page where they named Jack the Ripper, would that be profiting from human suffering in the same way, or was it kind of that recency effect?
Yeah, I think the photos, like selling the photos, in bad taste, but I don't know how you can apply that fairly across everybody.
Peter, why did you shake your head?
Wasn't Jack the Ripper in Whitechapel?
Yeah, but it was. The news was like all around the country, right? It wasn't just a Whitechapel thing. Anyway, Simon, I've chosen Jack the Ripper as my media moment for 2022. What would be your key media moment?
Oh, well, I mean, I guess like one of the biggest things was Substack launching its recommendations tool. There was always the knock against Substack was that this was the claim by a lot of its critics, was it was just yet another newsletter sending tool, and yet it took 10% of all payments. Any kind of revenue that you were generating on the platform, it took 10%, and everybody was like, well, why would I give it 10% when I can just, as soon as I start seeing some success, migrate my audience over to another platform like Ghost or MailChimp where I don't have to pay that large of percentage. Substack launched something called recommendations, which basically introduced network effects into the Substack ecosystem, helped their creators start building an audience in the same way that you can build an audience on like Facebook or YouTube, not through an algorithm, but basically kind of like a update to the old fashioned blog roll. And that has, definitely accelerated the growth of a lot of newsletters and has given them a lot more justification to stay on the platform and not migrate off of it. So that was definitely, a big move for Substack and the creator economy.
This is exactly what I mean. It's not the shiny, exciting sort of Web3 crypto metaversey things that have been good this year. It's little changes like that have made a big difference.
Yeah, and they're definitely doing some new things in terms of blending old school newsletters and the idea that you should own your audience, but also introducing network effects, which are usually associated with lock-in, like closed walled platforms like Facebook. So they've been doing a good job of riding that balance between those two different worlds, and they can still claim to be a creator-first platform that allows you to own your audience.
Very nice. Well, Peter, you want to talk about some artificial intelligence. You want to talk about iRobot. I can feel it.
I want to talk. What was the robot's name? Sonny. I want Sonny to come and work with me. I think I'm genuinely optimistic about the way things are developing in AI, not necessarily technology, but the way people are talking about it. I think the conversation's moved on, even although Esther says all the illustrators are going to have to go and find new jobs. I think the conversation's moved on from AI will take your job and you'll be replaced by a robot. And I think it's much more about here's how AI can help you do your job, which is much, much more interesting. Troy Young, on his Algorithms versus People newsletter, just put a list of 50 AI things that are, that he found interesting. Covers creative tools that we've already talked about, but he also talks about automated marketing, like writing assistants, personal assistants, things that are going to make a difference to your own kind of output and productivity, and just a bunch of cool toys, which are really good. So I think it's, as well as it getting more practical, it's also it's getting louder. People are writing about it more often, talking about it more often, and talking about the real practical applications. I think part of that, I don't know if you've seen the LSE's journalism AI project, which has got all sorts of resources and stuff on there about how newsrooms are using AI practically. They bring in fellows every so often and they do real world projects. It's just very cool. It reminded me a lot of the membership puzzle project in terms of, okay, how are we going to do this, and shared learning from these projects. I think that practicality around AI is really interesting.
This is the first time, like our entire lives, we've heard about the future of AI and we've seen these futuristic movies and stuff like that. I don't know if you feel the same way, but it was only within the last year where I was like, wow, some of this stuff is actually starting to feel kind of futuristic. Like I feel like there's been a great leap forward in AI, and now we're just kind of shocked, like, oh wow, maybe this future actually is coming sooner rather than later.
I completely agree with that. In fact, I was just about to say, for the past couple of years, we've seen, publishers say, oh, this article was written by a robot, can you tell? And then it's this year in particular where we've seen people almost not do that as a bit of novelty, but actually say, look, this is how it's enhancing the reporting, and this is why we can actually get some of the analysis out because the robot is doing part of the work. Go on, Peter.
Well, what's really funny about that is that articles written by AI, Google is slamming them for SEO. They're losing like 70% of their traffic because Google's identified it as an AI written article. Neil Patel did a piece on this. So that's like the snake eating its tail. Google's gone out there, and what was the developer said AI was going to eat the world or whatever it was he said.
There was a Google developer who thought that the AI had reached sentience, basically. Sentience.
So we're now in a position where the journalists are almost the filter between the AI and the algorithm. Oh, what a wonderful world. Well, Esther, you've got a slightly more far-flung example for your media moment.
Yeah. I'm going to try and say this straight. So I was reading up some examples of publishers that were using the metaverse, and there's actually an example of a niche B2B magazine in the UK that's done it. So I was reading the CM Publishing magazine. They're a Haymarket title, Management Today. So they sort of partnered up with an agency who owned some virtual real estate. But they own some sort of pixels in this Decentraland space. And they they work with them to build a virtual cover of the Management Today front cover, which is apparently the virtual equivalent of 12 meters high. I don't know how that translates. And their magazine is normally paywalled, but they made the magazine accessible to people who came through the link. The idea I thought was kind of cool because their logic was, well, this is a special episode. This is a special issue dedicated to the metaverse. So we kind of need to really dip our toes into it in order to really understand it and to give that reporting credibility. But the results were just really, really vague. And then it actually transpired that they couldn't prove any of the increase in views to their magazine came from the metaverse. And they sort of, the outcome of it was basically that it's quite difficult to measure this kind of data in the metaverse. And for me, that's one of the key things that needs to be in place before publishers start going into this thing is, how are you going to measure ROI? How are you going to measure success?
Well, no one's ever sorted it for podcasting, so that's doing okay.
Well,
I was just about to say, it took until this year for the IAB UK to introduce audio and gaming into its gold standard. And that's so God knows how long this will take. But what it is a good, like you said, it's novelty. This is a good example of, oh, look, we're getting ahead of the curve. We're showing that we know what we're writing about. So to that end, I think we should announce that we're actually going to be recording the next episode of Media Voices within the metaverse. So we'll share those links. Everyone can come and see. But
so you buy a place next to Snoop Dogg.
Yeah.
Can you walk over and say hello?
You can borrow some sugar from him if he's there, if he's online.
Oh.
He's rethinking it.
That's interesting.
Well, we'll have to come back to this next year. I would love to have seen the conversation move on next year, but I think, as we've all said, this might be the year that a sense of realism has come to Web3. So anything that we talk about next year might be slightly more structured, might be slightly more regulated, might be slightly more sensible in a couple of ways. But,
maybe we'll have to rename this chapter and go from calling it emerging tech to just like old and boring tech.
Old and boring tech, yeah, that'd be good. We'll be on Web 5 by then. So, Simon, thank you so much for coming on and having the chat.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. If the users, oh my God, I'm into the matrix. If the listeners want to find you and sort of seek out your insight, where can they do that?
I think you should just Google my name, Simon Owens. If you want, you can Google Simon Owens newsletter, and you will get to all the different, you'll come to my website, my newsletter, and all the other stuff as well.
Thanks again to Membership and Subscription Suite Pool for sponsoring this season of the Media Voices podcast and our upcoming Media Moments 2022 report. If you'd like to learn more about topics like optimizing subscription conversion rates, retention strategies, and more, they've got a bunch of helpful resources at blog.pool.tech. That's triple O in pool.
And don't forget, you can pre-register to download that Media Moments 2022 report by going to voices.media/MM22. But thank you again to Simon. And do come back next week when we're going to be doing another deep dive into one of the topics from our upcoming report.
It's our last one next week.
Is it? Jesus.
Yeah.
But for now, thank you so much for listening and goodbye.